The crystal wine glass slipped from a smiling guest's hand, but everyone in the ballroom knew it wasn't an accident. Deep red wine splashed across the plain, gray suit of the quiet man standing near the back of the hall. The expensive fabric of the carpet absorbed the dripping stain, as laughter echoed beneath the glittering chandeliers. Nearly 200 wealthy executives, investors, and celebrities watched without saying a word. Some smiled, some looked away. Not one person stepped forward to help. The man simply looked down at his ruined jacket, wiped a drop of wine from his cheek, and calmly thanked the waiter who rushed over with a towel. None of them knew that before sunset, the fate of their biggest business deal, and perhaps their entire company, would rest in his hands. Before we begin, if you believe kindness and second chances matter more than appearances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in doing the right thing, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories that remind the world compassion still exists. The annual Horizon Global Leadership Summit was the most prestigious corporate event of the year. Every major investor wanted an invitation, every technology company hoped to receive recognition, and every executive dreamed of standing on its stage. The grand ballroom overlooked a sparkling harbor where luxury yachts floated beneath the bright afternoon sun. Fresh flowers lined every table. Live musicians filled the room with elegant melodies, and servers moved carefully between guests, carrying silver trays filled with expensive drinks and gourmet meals. Cameras flashed constantly as business leaders celebrated another year of record profits. Among the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses walked a man who looked strangely ordinary. His name was Rowan Mercer. His suit had clearly been worn for several years. His shoes were polished but old. He carried no assistant, wore no luxury watch, and introduced himself to no one. He quietly admired the decorations, occasionally smiling as employees hurried around making final preparations. Many assumed he was part of the hotel staff, or perhaps an accountant invited by mistake. Rowan preferred it that way. Very few people recognized his face because he had spent the last decade avoiding interviews, magazine covers, and television appearances. While other billionaires competed for attention, Rowan believed businesses should speak louder than their owners. Years earlier, after losing both parents in a highway accident, he had inherited almost nothing except their honesty and determination. Starting from a tiny rented office with outdated computers, he built one of the world's most influential private investment groups. His company specialized in rescuing struggling businesses, protecting employee jobs, and funding innovative ideas ignored by traditional investors. That quiet philosophy had transformed Mercer Capital into one of the most respected investment firms on the planet. Today's summit carried enormous significance. A billion-dollar partnership known only as Project Summit would be announced before the evening concluded. Several competing corporations had spent nearly 18 months preparing proposals. Winning the investment would transform whichever company earned Rowan's approval into an international powerhouse. Losing it could send stock prices crashing before markets even opened the following morning. Yet only a handful of board members knew Rowan himself planned to attend anonymously before making his final decision. He wanted to see people when they believed no important person was watching. Character revealed itself best during ordinary moments. Across the ballroom, another figure commanded everyone's attention. Victor Hargrove, the celebrated CEO of Hargrove Dynamics, moved confidently from table to table, shaking hands. His company had become the favorite to secure Project Summit. Every financial journalist predicted his victory. His tailored navy tuxedo, confident smile, and polished speeches impressed nearly everyone he met. Beside him stood his daughter, Cassandra, the company's ambitious marketing director. Elegant, intelligent, and fiercely protective of the family's reputation, she had spent years building the public image that made Hargrove Dynamics appear flawless. Neither noticed Rowan quietly observing employees instead of executives. He noticed a young waiter nervously balancing heavy trays while senior managers barked unnecessary orders. He noticed a cleaner apologizing repeatedly after accidentally bumping into a decorative plant. He noticed interns standing alone while influential guests ignored them completely. Whenever someone seemed uncomfortable, Rowan offered a warm smile. Whenever someone dropped something, he quietly helped pick it up. Nobody connected those small acts with extraordinary wealth. Several hotel employees later admitted they remembered only one guest asking how their day was going. That guest was Rowan. Meanwhile, Victor gathered several influential investors near the center stage. Confident laughter echoed through the ballroom as he proudly described how Hargrove Dynamics would dominate global markets after securing the mysterious investment everyone anticipated. Not far away, Cassandra noticed Rowan standing near one of the refreshment tables, reading the event brochure. She frowned. His modest appearance disrupted the carefully crafted image surrounding their exclusive celebration. She whispered something to an event coordinator, who quickly approached Rowan. The coordinator politely asked whether he possessed the proper invitation. Rowan smiled gently and produced the elegant black invitation from his pocket. The coordinator examined it twice. It was authentic. In fact, it carried one of the highest security classifications issued for the event. Confused, the coordinator apologized and walked away. Cassandra watched the interaction from across the room. Instead of accepting the explanation, she assumed someone important had accidentally given an invitation to the wrong person. Her frustration quietly grew. As afternoon sunlight streamed through enormous glass windows overlooking the harbor, guests gathered for networking before the official presentations began. Conversations centered on stock prices, acquisitions, luxury vacations, and private aircraft. Rowan wandered toward an exhibit, displaying several young entrepreneurs selected to present startup ideas later that day. One nervous inventor struggled to explain his environmentally friendly battery design because almost no executives stopped to listen. Rowan spent nearly 15 minutes encouraging him, asking thoughtful questions and complimenting his research. The young inventor left smiling for the first time all day. Across the room, Victor observed this with mild amusement. He quietly joked to another executive that charity conversations were nice, but billion-dollar investments required serious people. Several guests laughed. None realized Rowan had quietly invested in hundreds of young entrepreneurs exactly like that inventor over the past decade. Eventually, the master of ceremonies announced a short intermission before the final networking session. Servers began circulating with sparkling water, fruit juices, and imported wines. The ballroom buzzed with excitement. Project Summit would soon be revealed. Cassandra noticed Rowan again. This time, he stood near several international investors who unknowingly welcomed him into their conversation. They appreciated his thoughtful questions and calm intelligence, even though they assumed he represented some smaller consulting firm. When Rowan politely mentioned that successful companies often measured leadership by how employees were treated during stressful moments, rather than during public speeches. One investor nodded thoughtfully. Cassandra overheard only part of the conversation. She interpreted Rowan's presence as an attempt to insert himself into circles where he did not belong. Determined to embarrass him enough that he would leave quietly, she walked confidently toward him carrying a full glass of expensive red wine. Nearby guests sensed tension immediately. The room gradually fell silent. Cassandra smiled politely, but her eyes carried unmistakable contempt. She criticized Rowan's appearance, suggesting prestigious events required certain standards. Rowan responded only with kindness, explaining that respect was never measured by clothing. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. His calm answer somehow made Cassandra feel even more challenged. As she turned away, her elbow deliberately struck the glass. Dark wine exploded across Rowan's jacket, shirt, and tie. The rich crimson stain spread instantly across the gray fabric. A few drops landed on his face. The crystal glass shattered across the marble floor. Gasps filled the ballroom. Then came scattered laughter. Someone quietly applauded. Several executives pulled out their phones, expecting another embarrassing social media moment. Rowan remained perfectly still. He looked down at the stain, accepted a towel from the horrified waiter, and instead of showing anger, he thanked the young employee for trying to help. The waiter apologized repeatedly, believing he would lose his job. Rowan gently assured him that accidents, and even intentional mistakes, should never cost honest people their livelihood. Those words caught the attention of several nearby investors. Victor finally approached, not to apologize, but to suggest Rowan leave before the evening presentations began. According to Victor, the event's image was too important for unnecessary distractions. Rowan quietly nodded. He folded the stained towel neatly onto a nearby tray. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket. Everyone assumed he was searching for business cards. Instead, he slowly removed a simple black envelope, embossed with a silver mountain emblem that only a handful of people in the world had ever seen. The conversation around the ballroom stopped instantly. One elderly international banker, standing across the room, suddenly turned pale the moment he recognized that emblem. His eyes widened with disbelief. Without saying a word, he placed his untouched glass on the table and began walking directly toward Rowan. Behind him, two other global investors noticed the same envelope. Their expressions changed immediately. Within seconds, whispers spread across the ballroom, like wildfire. Victor frowned, unable to understand why some of the most powerful financiers in attendance suddenly looked more nervous than confident. Cassandra still believed she had merely embarrassed an unimportant guest. She had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, every person in that ballroom would discover the devastating truth. The quiet man, whose dignity they had just humiliated, wasn't there hoping to win the billion-dollar deal. He was there to decide who deserved it. The ballroom grew so quiet that even the musicians lowered their instruments without being asked. The elderly banker reached Rowan first, his face filled with a mixture of disbelief and respect. Instead of greeting him with a handshake, the distinguished financier slightly bowed his head before extending both hands. The gesture stunned everyone present. This was a man who advised governments and negotiated trillion-dollar international investments, yet he stood before the quiet guest with genuine admiration. One by one, several other global investors followed, greeting Rowan as though they had just encountered one of the most influential business leaders alive. Confusion swept across the room as whispers turned into frantic conversations. Victor felt his confidence slipping away, while Cassandra's expression slowly changed from irritation to uncertainty. The master of ceremonies hurried toward the gathering after noticing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. He glanced at the black envelope, then at Rowan's face, and his eyes widened instantly. His prepared smile disappeared. Without hesitation, he picked up the microphone and addressed the audience with a trembling voice. He apologized for the unexpected interruption before announcing that the chairman representing Mercer Capital had officially arrived. The words echoed through the grand ballroom like thunder. Every conversation stopped. Every smile vanished. Nearly 200 guests stared at the man whose stained jacket still dripped with red wine. Cameras lowered instead of flashing. Several executives quietly placed their glasses on nearby tables, realizing they had just witnessed something they would never forget. Victor's face turned completely pale. He had studied Mercer Capital's achievements for years, hoping his company would one day earn its investment. He knew the firm's founder rarely appeared in public, avoided interviews, and never sought attention. No recent photographs existed because Rowan refused to become a celebrity. Suddenly, every detail made sense. The simple suit, the calm behavior, the quiet observations throughout the afternoon. Rowan had not attended to impress anyone. He had come to learn who people truly were when they believed no powerful eyes were watching them. Cassandra felt as though the floor beneath her had disappeared. Only minutes earlier, she had intentionally humiliated the very man whose signature would determine the future of Hargrove Dynamics. Her heartbeat raced as memories replayed in her mind. She remembered questioning his invitation, mocking his appearance, and deliberately spilling wine across his clothing while hundreds of guests watched. The laughter that had echoed through the ballroom now sounded unbearable inside her own thoughts. Victor stepped forward, desperately trying to repair the damage. His confident speeches from earlier had vanished, replaced by nervous words that stumbled over one another. He apologized repeatedly, insisting it had all been an unfortunate misunderstanding. He blamed the stress of the event, poor communication, and unfortunate circumstances. Rowan listened patiently, without interrupting. His expression remained calm, but there was sadness in his eyes rather than anger. That quiet disappointment somehow carried more weight than any shouting ever could. Rowan slowly looked around the magnificent ballroom. His gaze rested on the expensive decorations, the luxurious buffet, and finally on the faces of the people who had laughed while another human being was publicly humiliated. He spoke softly, yet every person heard each word with perfect clarity. He explained that businesses often spent millions of dollars developing impressive presentations, but character revealed itself in moments that could never be rehearsed. Financial statements could predict profits. Marketing campaigns could influence public opinion. Awards could decorate office walls. None of those things measured integrity. He reminded everyone that throughout the afternoon he had met hotel employees, interns, cleaners, technicians, and young entrepreneurs. Some people had treated those individuals with kindness despite having nothing to gain. Others had ignored them completely. A few had spoken to them with open disrespect. He explained that Mercer Capital never invested only in products or technology. It invested in people. Every billion-dollar partnership represented thousands of employees whose futures depended on ethical leadership. If leaders failed simple tests of compassion, no amount of projected profit could justify the investment. Silence settled over the room once again. Many executives lowered their heads, reflecting on their own behavior. Several remembered passing employees without acknowledging them. Others realized they had laughed because everyone else laughed. The uncomfortable truth spread through the ballroom that no one had forced them to remain silent. Each person had made a choice. Rowan then surprised everyone by asking the young waiter to step forward. The nervous employee believed he was about to be blamed, despite Rowan's earlier reassurance. Instead, Rowan thanked him publicly for trying to help without hesitation. He praised the young man's honesty, kindness, and willingness to accept responsibility for something that was never his fault. The audience applauded sincerely this time. The waiter fought back tears, overwhelmed that someone so powerful had noticed him not for his mistakes, but for his character. Next, Rowan invited the young entrepreneur, with the environmentally friendly battery design, onto the stage. The inventor looked shocked as Rowan revealed that Mercer Capital would personally fund the project because innovation deserved encouragement, especially when others ignored it. The announcement earned another standing ovation. Hope replaced embarrassment as everyone witnessed the type of leadership Rowan believed in. Then came the moment Victor had feared most. The massive screen behind the stage displayed the title, Project Summit. The room held its breath. Every financial analyst had predicted Hargrove Dynamics would receive the historic investment. Instead, Rowan calmly announced that Mercer Capital had chosen another company whose executives had spent the entire afternoon encouraging employees, supporting small innovators, and treating every guest with equal respect, regardless of appearance or status. Their financial proposal had not been the most profitable on paper, but their leadership reflected the values Mercer Capital refused to compromise. Victor closed his eyes. Years of preparation disappeared in a single announcement. Billions in future growth vanished because of choices that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or technology. For the first time in his career, he understood that arrogance could destroy opportunities faster than any economic downturn. Cassandra could no longer hold back her emotions. Tears rolled down her face as she stepped toward Rowan once more. This time, there was no pride left, only sincere regret. She admitted that she had judged him entirely by his appearance and had forgotten the values her late mother once taught her about respecting every person. She confessed that watching him respond to humiliation with grace had forced her to confront parts of herself she had ignored for years. Many expected Rowan to reject her apology. Instead, he smiled gently. He explained that forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. Forgiveness could be given in a moment because it freed the heart from bitterness. Trust, however, had to be rebuilt through consistent actions. He wished her well and expressed hope that this painful experience would become the beginning of genuine change, rather than merely a lesson learned because money was involved. His words brought tears to countless eyes throughout the ballroom. As the event concluded beneath the warm golden light of the late afternoon sun, something remarkable happened. Executives who had spent years competing with one another began thanking hotel staff. Before leaving, several investors introduced themselves to interns they had ignored earlier. Business cards were exchanged not because someone looked important, but because people finally began seeing one another differently. The young waiter later received a scholarship funded anonymously through Mercer Capital to complete his business degree. The entrepreneur whose invention had nearly gone unnoticed eventually built one of the world's leading clean energy companies, creating thousands of jobs. Months later, many corporations quietly changed their executive training programs after hearing about what had happened at the Horizon Summit. They began teaching empathy alongside leadership because they understood that culture started with everyday choices. Victor resigned as chief executive the following year. Rather than disappearing from public life, he dedicated himself to rebuilding the company's reputation through honest leadership and employee welfare. It was a difficult journey, but for the first time, his decisions were guided by humility instead of ego. Cassandra volunteered with nonprofit organizations supporting young entrepreneurs, determined never again to measure a person's worth by clothing, wealth, or social status. As for Rowan, he returned to the quiet life he always preferred. Newspapers continued searching for interviews he never accepted. Business magazines published articles about the mysterious investor who valued integrity above profit. But Rowan remained focused on helping people rather than building his own fame. Those who truly knew him understood that his greatest achievement was never becoming a billionaire. It was proving that kindness could still influence the world's biggest decisions, Before this story ends, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly because of their appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else to choose kindness. The world often teaches us to admire expensive suits, luxury cars, and powerful titles. But true greatness is revealed by how we treat people who can offer us nothing in return. Every stranger we meet carries a story we cannot see. A single act of compassion may change a life forever, while a single moment of cruelty can cost opportunities beyond imagination. In the end, respect is never earned through wealth alone. It is earned through character, humility, and the courage to choose kindness when no one seems to be watching. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness is always more valuable than status, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing inspiring stories that remind us all that the greatest victories in life are won not by power, but by compassion.